All right, so once again, good morning, everybody. I'm Ashley Cadwell. I'm the Stormwater Lead at the County Office of Education. Thank you all so much for joining us virtually. It's our first time trying this out, so bear with us as we're figuring it out. We appreciate you all taking time out of your day to jump on with us. We have some speakers here from DMAX Engineering who are going to be giving us some great information today. Ladies, whenever you're ready, I'll start the introductions. Just give me a thumbs up.
Yeah, I think we're ready. I don't know if we want to mute everyone and then just unmute selectively so we avoid any.
They're muting everybody.
I'm going to click.
Whoever's speaking got muted.
Okay, sorry, I unmuted myself. I was just giving another reminder. Wanted to make sure everybody is aware that we are recording. It keeps popping up a notification that I let you know that you are being recorded, so I'm letting you know. So I'm going to jump right in so we can get started, make the most of everybody's time.
This is ridiculous. We got one person should.
Okay, so our first speaker today, we're going to have Lana Graves from DMAX Engineering. Lana holds a bachelor's and master's of science degrees in the earth sciences and is an assistant project scientist at DMAX Engineering with a background in stormwater compliance, program planning, inspections, and reporting. Lana is also a QISP and has been working with SCCOE Compliance Group for the last several years. So thank you so much, Lana. Let's go.
Alrighty, hi everyone. Yeah, so I am happy to be here with you. It was nice to meet a lot of you this last year during inspections. I'm going to be starting off the presentation, and then Annika Dorman is going to be hopping in later. So today, and all of you, I think, know Annika. She's been here for quite a while too. So today we're going to be going over a refresher of stormwater, pretty much Stormwater 101, talk a little bit about current events. Probably the biggest one is COVID, and if there was any impacts, hopefully you guys all know the answer to that, but we'll go over that again. Pollutants and BMPs, ones that are often seen in maintenance facilities, and just some tips on making sure those don't end up in your samples. Permit requirements, if you're under the IGP, compliance levels, and then which lower is better in this case, and then finally compliance strategy, so how to stay in those low levels. All right, so off to start, stormwater. What is stormwater? For those of you that have been here, you're familiar with this statement. It's rain. So as we know, we've got some coming this weekend, which is going to be great for a couple reasons, because San Diego is always needing rain, but another is it's coming on the weekend, so hopefully you won't have to sample if it's outside your business hours. And Annika will probably talk about that a little bit later with regards to permit requirements. So this rain becomes stormwater from the point that it makes contact with the earth, our cities, our rooftops, until it reaches another water body. So a creek, a river, a bay, the lake, the ocean, or estuaries. We're in San Diego, we've got a lot of those. And what's the big deal? So I think this is something we're not often taught in school or exposed to, but runoff is not treated. So it's not going into the sewer system, it's going into the separate stormwater sewer system, and it pretty much just leaves our driveways, leaves our paved areas, reaches the culverts, and gets washed out to the water bodies, and anything that's in that water is then being transported just directly out to our streams, our rivers, our oceans, our bays, which is not ideal for the habitats that are there or the ecosystem, so we want to minimize that. And another reason that this is a big deal is because it contributes to erosion, and which has all sorts of infrastructure implications and also contributes dirt to our natural water systems, which we want to avoid. The next image really captures why this is more of an issue in urban environments than if we were just living 250 years ago and things weren't as built up as they were today. So on the left, I believe it's the left, on the green side, you have the natural environment. You can see that when it rains, a fair amount of that rain is getting evaporated, and that's just based to the urban effect. And then you get that kind of filtration effect where anything that rain might have picked up on its way, the rain's going to soak into the earth. That earth is going to filter it, and it's either going to discharge it to the water body, or it's going to go into groundwater and kind of go through a natural purification system. And then the last component is you will have sun runoff in a natural system, but it's not going to be very much, so you don't have a lot of energy moving topsoil and eroding as you would in the urban environment, which you can see over on the right, the orange side. So in the urban environment, we have our rain, we get a little bit less evaporation, which means more water is either going to need to run off or infiltrate. But because so many surfaces are paved over, we get a lot of runoff, which results in a lot of erosion and a lot of pollutants that are not getting filtered out in those shallower and deeper infiltration levels. And that's all going directly into our water bodies. In order to kind of control this or minimize the negative effects, the state has several permits. One of them you guys are probably all familiar with to some degree or another is the Industrial General Permit, or the IGP as we often shorten it to. And this is a state of California permit, and it's enforced by the different municipalities, the Regional Water Board in particular. It plays a large role in making sure that facilities that have industrial activities, such as the bus maintenance facilities, are under this permit and complying with it. So I would say reaching out to the current events and what's going on right now. I mentioned earlier that COVID-19 is going on, and that kind of impacted how we go about doing things, right? A lot of bus facilities shut down for a little while. A lot of you had fewer staff on site, and the big question was, okay, are we going to need to meet all of the requirements that are usually expected of us every year? And the answer is yes. All the IGP requirements are the same. California and the California Water Boards decided that their activities are essential activities, so we still need to be meeting all the permit requirements, which Annika will touch on later. One permit requirement is doing an annual site evaluation, the ACSCE. And some of you we would have reached out to already. We're asking that you do a self-evaluation this year. Annika's still going to do the visit, but we're just kind of trying to get this out of the way, make sure that that requirement is met. If you guys have any questions about it, feel free to email or call either of us. And another current event that you guys may have heard about is that we are probably in a La Nina year. And this is just kind of a overview of how weather scientists know that we're in an El Nino year. They look at the shape of the polar jet stream. They look at high pressure areas and what's happening along the equator. And as you can see, some areas in the north end up being a lot more wet, and then some areas to the south end up being more dry and warm, and we're kind of in that in-between area. But for San Diego, it mostly means we're going to get less rain, it's going to be drier, it's going to be warmer. And so what that means for us is that you really want to make sure your facility is ready. We're not going to have as many rain events to capture samples this year. There's not going to be as many rain events to kind of, I mean, you don't want this to happen, but to scrub your site, right? Like you want to make sure that you're the one keeping your site clean and that the rain's not playing a role. That first flush might be one of only like 3 rain events that we get. Hopefully 3. I think there were a couple years where we only had 2 rain events. And so if in that first flush your sample picks up a lot of pollutants, you're not going to have many chances to kind of make that up or bring down that average in subsequent rain events. So just keep that in mind. You should always be very ready, but I think this year, just keep in mind you won't have as many chances as you may in other years. That being said, weather science is still developing, and maybe we'll have a lot more rain events than we anticipate. So how do you keep your facility kind of like in tip-top shape? Identifying your common pollutants, the pollutants your site might have issues with, and then implementing BMPs or best management practices in order to keep those keep those down, keep those under control. So what I've seen from visiting a lot of the sites is that there's kind of some main issues that bus sites deal with. Your facility, you know exactly what's going on and what you need to address. But I think some common ones are tires and brakes. They can be a source of zinc and copper. This is toxic to organisms and people, and it pops up a lot in people's samples, or I'm sorry, facility samples, as being close to the limit or a little bit over the acceptable limit. Another source of common pollutants are facility grounds. So from that, we're going to get, if you have unpaved areas, you get dirt, otherwise known as total suspended solids, TSS. This can be an issue because it can actually clog the storm drain system, which is kind of a municipal infrastructure issue. But the other thing is it also gets into our water systems. It clouds the water. It creates dirt layers that pretty much cover up habitat and creates really a series of repercussions in those aquatic habitats. And then another common thing is vehicle maintenance. So kind of the byproducts of that, if it's not being done in a covered area, which it should always be, or if you have vehicles that are standing outside and they have leaks or some other maintenance issue, you might end up with fluids on the ground, and such as oil, grease, things like this. When those get into the water bodies, they inhibit oxygen uptake of different organisms, and they can also transport heavy metals. So they might capture that zinc and copper that you want to avoid. And then when the rain washes everything away, you not only have oil and grease, you also have higher heavy metal levels. So when it comes to controlling those with BMPs, here's just some tips on some of them. So for zinc and copper, and I also should have put iron in here, which is another one that these tips can kind of help with, is you can use vacuum assisted sweepers. So if available, just kind of sucking that particulate matter up is probably the best way to go about that. If you're using a sweeper by hand, you're not sucking it up, and that's unless you're using a shop vac to kind of supplement with that sweeping, which is ideal, because this particulate matter, it goes in the air and then it just resettles somewhere else, and then the rain's going to wash that away eventually. Another is making sure you're disposing of your used fluids correctly, and also cleaning those up as soon as possible when you see them on your facility grounds. Steam cleaning. So if you're able to, steam cleaning on like a paved area, an area with asphalt, anywhere that it's going to be exposed to rainwater, that's a good way to ensure that you're getting kind of a deep clean in those areas. And another is, this is not always like directly seen as a connection to the heavy metals, but again, similar to how oil and different vehicle fluids can transport these heavy metals, so can sediments. So you want to stabilize your slopes and landscaping, and then repave crumbling asphalt. Both of those can end up being a source of heavier metals. And then something else that I heard from one of the schools this year that I think was a really good idea is consider changing products to something with less pollutant potential. So if you have your brake pads and you know that they're giving off one of these metals that you're having issues with, then possibly looking into an alternative might be a good idea. Then you're not always playing catch up of trying to clean up the byproduct of this. You're actually just stopping it at the source. All right, and so dirt, we kind of touched on it already. It can transport those heavy metals, and then also it can be an issue downstream and in the stormwater system. So you want to make sure that you're stabilizing your dirt lots and driveways. If you're parking your buses on kind of like dirt lots, how are you making sure that's stabilized during storm events, that it's not getting transported outside of your lot during dry seasons, and then how that's not getting, how is your storm drain protected from that sediment? Some things that I've seen different sites have is laying down gravel, making sure that, you know, that sediment, when it gets hit with the rain, when it gets run over by the buses, it's mostly staying in place. Another is a rumble pad, and that's just to kind of keep your sediment on site, and then hopefully stabilizing it within your own site. Another, stabilizing slopes and landscaping areas. So how are you going to do that? Making sure that your vegetation is kind of holding up to the dry weather of San Diego, getting that drought resistant landscaping if you can, or if you're using grass, making sure it's getting the right amount of fertilizer, but not so much that that's going to wash off. So I know every site kind of has its own challenges when it comes to this, because plants in San Diego can be difficult. But if you've decided that that's how your landscaping or slope is going to be stabilized, you just want to make sure that's kept on top of. And another is securing straw wattles, fiber roll wattles along kind of like slopes where you know that there's a potential for sediment to move downhill, go with the force of gravity. That becomes really important. And then lastly, I already touched on it, but repave that crumbling asphalt. It can carry those heavy metals. It can be a source of soaking up oil and grease. And then it also just contributes to your total suspended solids count, which we want to keep low. All right, and then the last one that we kind of touched on was oil and grease. So making sure that you have drip pans on hand, doing regular maintenance of your machinery, excuse me. And I'm sure a lot of you guys, obviously, everyone wants to make sure their buses are running. So this, not to like say how to run your shop, but making sure that those leaks are being looked into, you know, having a reoccurring schedule of, or not that they're being looked into, I'm sorry, that they're being checked for. If you're parking on kind of a sediment or a darker area like parking lot, you may not see those leaks very quickly. So want to keep an eye out for those. And then the other thing is making sure you have a spill kit on hand. And not only that, but having a spill kit cleanup protocol. So you see the spill, you put the spill kit down. When are you going to get that cleaned up? When is that going to be removed, looked into? How long does it take? In a lot of industrial sites that I've been to, the spill kit is applied, which is great. That first step is there, but then it will be kind of forgotten. And then if it rains, not only is the grease that was there or the oil that was there washed away, but also the kind of material that was used to soak it up. So it's just can be a issue that kind of multiplies upon itself. Yeah, so I think those are just, again, very commonly seen issues. You guys are familiar, like I said, with what's going on at your site. But yes, I think that sums it up for the pollutants and BMPs. If you guys have any questions about ones that you're dealing with, of course, you can talk to us. And now I'm going to hand it over to Annika. She's going to go over permit requirements, and we'll move on from there.
So does anybody have any questions on the first portion of the presentation? Just a reminder, if you do have any questions about that, you can feel free to use the hand raise feature or question directly into the chat. Ashley, were you going to pop on and say something?
Yes, so feel free to send through if you have any questions, or if you want to use the raise hand feature, that's fine too. But in the meantime, I'll go ahead and introduce Annika. I'm sure most of you already know, but Annika Dorman holds a Bachelor's of Science in Environmental Systems and is a senior scientist at DMAX Engineering with a strong background in municipal and industrial stormwater permit compliance. She is a certified professional in stormwater quality, CPSWQ, and an industrial general permit trainer of record, qualified industrial stormwater practitioner, QISP. Annika has been working with SCCOE compliance group since 2013, and we're very happy to have her. All right, I didn't see any questions come through, so we're going to just continue on ahead. But if you guys do have questions, just throw them in the chat box or raise your hand. Thanks so much.
All right, thank you, Ashley. Yeah, so you guys know me, I hope. If you're new to your district and we haven't met yet, then we should meet later this year. As Lana was saying earlier, due to COVID-19, we are pushing back our site visits a little bit, so it will be a little bit of a delay before I get to meet you and see you if I haven't already. But we'll get there. Hopefully the next couple of months we'll see a lot of progress, and things will be a little safer. We'll be able to more freely move about the county. So getting into permit requirements. So since the industrial permit training is required of all staff members that are performing any BMPs or doing any work on your bus yard sites, this training is required for those members. So I do want to just initially remind everybody to send in your names if you aren't already logged into the chat to make sure that you can get your certificates. So the permit does require best management practices. So this was new with this permit. Previously, there was no specifics required, but now there are. These will be familiar to you if you are the one that is performing any of your monthly observations, because those minimum best management practices are distilled down into workable items that you can check off on your monthly checklists. So these include I'll get into the different categories of those minimum best management practices in the next couple of slides. The permit also requires monitoring, of course. I've just mentioned the monthly observations, which you guys do on your sites yourselves, and then also sampling if it ever does rain. We do need to get those samples and have those tested for the different constituents that have the potential to discharge from your site. The permit also requires reporting. So everybody has to use smarts. It's not the best, most amazing, easy to use system, but it's what we got, and everything does have to be uploaded to that. So it's always good to make sure you're QCing your smarts accounts, make sure that your legally responsible person has access, etc. So it's good to do an audit, which is something I typically do after I meet with you for your annual visit. Okay, so minimum best management practices, getting into the specifics of those. The first is good housekeeping. So the permit does require specific cleaning protocols. So it does require that you keep your site clean and, well maintained. So, basically sweeping, vacuum sweeping, anything that you're doing to keep anything that could be mobilized by rainwater. So any fine particulates, trash, etc. Needs to be taken care of so that it's not contributing any pollutants to the downstream water bodies. It does include minimum best management practices for preventive maintenance, which is something that is generally taken care of at your school districts because you have other requirements for maintenance every 3,000 miles or 45 days, I believe. So those preventative maintenance things include, making sure that you're getting oil changes, you're having regular maintenance on the vehicles to prevent leaks, etc. It also includes spill and leak prevention and response. Lana got into a little bit of cleanup and why leaks can be problematic on your site. This also includes prevention, such as having containment for your liquids, other basic Bmps to make sure that no liquids are spilling out on the plant. Material handling and waste management, that's also going to be your containment and cover for any hazardous materials or anything, any liquid storage and any waste storage. So that's having lids on your trash cans and dumpsters, making sure your materials are stored appropriately within cover and within containment and under cover. And you're handling those appropriately as well. So having proper disposal of your hazardous waste to a licensed waste hauler, keeping appropriate records, etc. Erosion and sediment controls, as Lana was going into as well, is preventing slopes from eroding, making sure you have that ground cover. If you're unable to have that, then stepwise other soil controls may be applied. So that includes the straw wattles, silt fences, other kinds of booms. There's also jute matting that you can lay down. So there's a variety of different erosion control methods. So making sure that is taken care of, as well as sediment control on your site. So gravel sites in particular, the gravel can become impacted, and then you have sort of loose dirt on top that's able to be mobilized. So making sure that keeps stabilized. Employee training, this is why we're here today. So everybody needs to be trained once a year on the industrial general permit. So making sure you get your names in so you can get your certificates. And then if you are disseminating that information to the rest of your staff, make sure that you're recording that information as well. So if it's just you at your department, and then you're going to be going ahead and training your mechanics on everything they need to know, the drivers on everything they need to know, just make sure you're recording that, keeping your training log so that that gets kept with your SWIP, and that's part of your compliance materials if you were to be audited by the regional board. And yeah, so that's getting into your quality assurance and record keeping. You do need to keep all records related to the bus yard for 5 years. If you have things that are older than that, you can feel free to purge, but you do need to keep 5 years worth of records. And to be safe, I would do 5 reporting years at least, so not just a calendar year. Your reporting year is probably safer. So getting into your monthly observations, hopefully you guys are doing this every month. One thing I would say is I know there's often a lot of turnover, people retiring often, and when they do so, it might not be at the top of their list to make sure that somebody is taking over those monthly inspections. So I just wanted to put that out there. If you are responsible for this and you're going to be leaving, try to remember to delegate that activity. If you are if you are managing the program and somebody else is taking care of that every month for you, just make sure you have some sort of check when they are leaving to turn that over to somebody else. But these should be done every month during regular working hours and when it's not raining. So my suggestion is to do these early in the month and to set a recurring reminder on your calendar to make sure that those are getting done early, because if it does start to rain later in the month and you haven't completed this yet, you'll be a little bit out of luck as far as being compliant. So you still want to complete it, but best to complete that early on in the month. Yeah, I'll get into this a little bit, and then we do have one question that popped up, so I'll address that in a moment. So during these monthly observations, you want to observe all outdoor areas of your site. You want to both look for evidence of discharges. So if you're near your drains, is there any staining? Is there any solids or liquids, residuals around the drain that indicate somebody may have come by? Sometimes we've seen fun things like, like mop strings hanging over the grate of an inlet. That's very indicative that somebody, dumped mop water there. I've seen paint. I've seen actual concrete sludge on top of drains. I've seen everything. So that would be the kind of evidence of a discharge that you might see, but it might be something very small, like a little bit of white coloration that might indicate somebody was, washing out a paint bucket, or something small that's a little bit harder to identify. So you do want to make sure that if you do see anything like that, you're investigating and making sure that that's taken care of, that does not happen again. And you're also looking for deficiencies. So you have your checklist, and that has your minimum BMPs that are applicable to your site. So you want to make sure that all of those are fully implemented, that the BMPs are adequate for that. So if you're looking at the one for housekeeping, making sure you don't have any sediment on site, be checking all the collection points. So the inlets, the curb gutters, the cracks in your asphalt, we know they're there. Is there a buildup of sediment in those areas? If so, that means that the BMP may not be fully implemented as it should. So you're going to want to improve those BMPs to make sure that those accumulations do not occur. Okay, and then we had a question pop up from Damien that you replaced the bioswale with new plants and ground cover, and will that affect the first rainwater sample? So in this case, you guys have a swale, which if people aren't familiar, that's an area that the water is directed into, which is landscaped, and it actually has an infiltration media soil layer below the landscaping. And the answer to that is that it may affect your first sample depending how hard it rains the first go, and how well the plants have been established. So if the plants are well established, they have a good root system, and they're nice and secure, there's not a lot of loose soil on top, then that shouldn't affect it negatively. It should be a benefit that we've got good plants there. Okay. So moving on, I'm going to get back to monthly observations. So what you're going to record on your sheet is your findings. So obviously, I love seeing the whole line down the adequate column. So that's, tells me that you guys have a well maintained site. Everything is well implemented. But if you do see anything, don't feel like you can't mark it as inadequate, but the only thing I want to see if you mark something inadequate is that there is some subsequent action to that. So if something's inadequate, what are you going to do about it? So if you did have some sediment building up in your curb gutters, are you going to increase the frequency of sweeping? Are you going to change the type of sweeping to a vacuum sweeper? What are you going to do about it? So if there's oil spills, it's okay to mark that they're there, but I want to see that you guys are addressing them, cleaning them up. Okay, it's good to compare your monthly to the last annual that I performed for you. So I can tend to be a little bit pickier, I think, than some of you. So I might have seen something. It's especially good because if something was a problem before, we want to make sure that that's not a common pattern. So if we saw sediment every year and we, said that it was good the rest of the year, but then I come back and I'm like, no, sediment's kind of an issue, then we want to make sure we're doing something more than what's been done previously to make sure that's not an issue going forward. You can also compare to your site map. I encourage you to take your site map around your site with you so that you can see where things are supposed to be, where the industrial boundaries end, and that will help you know if you do see tires or something bus related outside of those industrial areas, that's not good and they need to be removed and put back into the industrial area. Because if you expand your boundaries, that means you would need to expand your sampling zones as well. So make sure that you are checking that, and things should remain at status quo. Okay, and once you're completed your monthly form, you want to send that to myself and to Ashley, and we will record those and make sure that those get reflected in your annual report at the end of the year. For sampling, when and where, obviously we need to have rain, but as group members, one benefit that you get for being in this group is you only have to sample 2 times per year. If you were out on your own, that number would be 4 times, which may not apply too much in years like this when we don't have very many rain events, but you are only required to sample 2 times per year. One time is between July and December, which is the first half of the reporting year, and once is between January and June, which is the second half. You do not need to sample if you don't need to sample twice in the second half of the year if you didn't get a sample in the first half of the year. It's only once, and if you don't have any qualified rain events, then you don't need to sample. When you sample, you need to sample at each industrial discharge point that has runoff. Refer to your site map because not every drain is a sample point. So you may have multiple different drainage areas, but the only ones you need to sample are the ones in which industrial activities occur, which is anywhere your buses are washed, maintained, or fueled. Okay. Always be prepared, of course. So, in our business, we're watching our weather reports all the time. And sometimes, when rain is coming, it can be a little surprising. So you want to make sure that your bottle kits are ready. Every year, during the summer is a good time to make sure all of that is prepared. You do need to check a reliable weather report weekly. So I've included a couple of links here. So weather.gov or wonderground.com are good baselines to just see, what's coming up. We don't get too excited, especially in California, unless the percentage reaches about 40%. That's when we start to mobilize. We start to schedule our sampling staff to go out to facilities where we take samples ourselves. And you need to have about 0.1 inches in order to get runoff from a paved site. So if you have an unpaved site or largely unpaved, it will take a little bit more than that to get runoff. But a paved facility at about 0.1 inches is when you start to get flow. Okay. I do send out pre-rain alerts, and I generally will attach a pre-rain checklist. So these are just good. This is not something required. This is just an additional tool for you to use to make sure that you're prepared and that you have as low pollutant discharge potential as possible. So that includes basically a quick rundown of all of the minimum BMPs on the site that should be implemented anyway. It also includes just a checklist like, hey, make sure you have your bottle kit, make sure you have your pH paper. That's one that comes up at the end often. And if you call me, you know, while it's happening and you don't have pH paper, I actually can't help you. The holding time for pH is only 15 minutes. So it's not a good practice. There, Mike Sawyer is showing his pH paper there. So generally comes in a little box and it's a little plastic thing inside. And it's just like paper tape. So it's very tiny, very simple. If you do not have your pH paper and you can't locate that, please contact Ashley because they do have some packs over at the county office that they can send over via truck mail. Same with your bottle kits. So if you don't have a complete bottle kit, make sure that you let us know. I do have spare kits in my office that we can send out to you as well. So I also recommend notifying your sampling personnel anytime you do see an upcoming storm. So making sure that they're not going to be on vacation. If they're not going to be available, you know, who's your alternate? Make sure that they are aware that they're going to need to do some sampling and keep on top of that. As always, even if you aren't ending up sampling, document the weather conditions for your records. The best we can do with our online weather reports, you know, is not going to be specific to your site. It's going to be whatever closest weather station we can find. So I know with a lot of you, what you end up seeing, you get a lot of little microclimates, and what you see at your site is not reflected in those weather reports. So your word and your documentation is what is key there. So if it didn't rain at your site and it rained everywhere else, make sure you're recording that there was no runoff at your facility. And likewise, you know, just if it did start to run off, we want to know what time it started. You know, was it a QSE or not? So this is all going back to if you got a qualified storm event. And this is important, especially if on dry years, because if you don't have any sampled events by the end of the year, then that just kind of raises the question, especially if other districts, other industrial permittees in your area did get samples, that might flag an audit by the regional board. So we want to make sure you have your records very documented clearly. Okay, so this is a common question for when to sample, and if there's any question at any time, I am always available to go through this with you and look at your weather reports and see if this applies for you. But this is also a handy chart. Thank you, Lana, for making this graphic. I love it. So we want to start at the top. You know, you only need to sample during qualified storm events. So what does that mean? That means it has to be more than 48 hours since the last rain event. What that means is runoff. So if you didn't get runoff on your site, then it doesn't count as a rain event. But you do need to have those 48 dry hours since the last time you had runoff. It has to be less than 12 hours since the rain began. And it has to be less than 4 hours since the start of business. If the rain began overnight. So if you come in and it started raining overnight, you want to make sure you get that sample within the first 4 hours of business. If it starts raining in the middle of your workday, be aware that you need to get that sample within the first 4 hours from the start of runoff. So this one's kind of a qualifier. You do need to have runoff in any of your industrial drainage areas. So if you only discharge from one and not from another, you do need to get the sample at the site where it's discharging. It doesn't have to run off at every industrial runoff point. So if you have one side where it's unpaved and you don't get runoff until you get 1/4 of an inch, then that would need to be sampled later. So if all of these are true, then yes, it's a qualifying storm event and you need to get ready to sample. Any questions coming up? So when you do take those samples, you have your sample observation form. And so when you take that, you need to observe every sample point and observe the sample in a clear container so that you can see what's in it. For those observations, you're going to check for anything that you can see. And if you do see anything in there, you want to check for and address whatever the source may be. Okay. So for sampling the pH, again, you want to get your paper handy, and you want to keep that little box with you because that's where your color guide will be. So you dip the paper into flowing water for a few seconds or until the paper is wet. It doesn't take long. You don't need to hold it in there. You don't need to read it while it's in the water. You just need to get it wet and then pull it out and then compare the color of the paper to the guide on the package. This graphic here shows you the different, the color range that you might see. If it's between colors, it's okay to estimate, but you only want to try to estimate as close to the nearest 0.5. So in between colors, you can go 0.5, but we don't want to see like 0.25 or anything trying to get more specific. Okay. You do want to measure your pH before handling your sample jars. Can anybody raise their hand and tell me why that is? And either unmute or put something in the chat. Any guesses?
Because if the pH is off, then don't bother sampling.
No. So that's a little tricky there. So if the pH is off, that may indicate there are pollutants in the water, but it doesn't keep you from having to take a sample. So I do want to make sure you are still getting your samples, even if your pH is high or low. There are some, if it is high or low, what you want to do is take it again. You want to be sure. But the reason not to take your pH after starting to take your sample is because the sample jars have acid in them. And if you're handling the jars, sometimes there's a small amount of acid residue that will coat the outside of the jars. Sometimes you see this on the inside of the plastic bag. You'll see a little bit of liquid. And so if you are touching those jars with acid and then you're touching the paper, the paper may pick up some of that acid. And so it may read artificially low. This is the same answer for the next pop quiz, which is why not to test the water out of your sample jar. You don't want to stick, so there's two reasons for that. So both, you obviously are going to have an acidic sample if you're testing it in one of the jars that contains that preservative. But also you don't want to be introducing and touching anything into your jar. So whatever's on your glove, you don't want getting into your sample either. We don't want dirty hands. We don't want anything that you may have touched to be contaminating your samples. Okay. But yes, if it brings up a good point that if you do see something wrong, you do have an opportunity to quickly remedy that situation before taking your sample. So this does allude to if you had a poor sample, obviously it's not preferred to be sending those to the lab because there may be other things associated with that pH that might be popping up in your other constituents. But it does give you a small window of opportunity to go and find it. So if it's low pH and it's acidic and it's not to do with your sample jars or any contamination like that, look around, go upstream, see where that might be coming from. Are there batteries stored outside? Is there open trash containers? Are there chemicals that are uncontained? You do have that 4-hour window in order to get those samples. So you have a small window to go and apply some additional Bmps during the rain event and see if you can't get that pH to improve. A high pH, you'll often see white powders, so gypsum, drywall dust, concrete dust. That's often what's going to trigger your high pH. Any questions on that? So sampling protocol, make sure that you are wearing gloves, obviously for, your own safety. You don't want those acids from the bottles getting on your skin, but you also don't want anything from your skin getting into your samples. So wear gloves, wear clean gloves. Don't try to reuse your gloves. So have a stock available to you. Fill your bottles directly if you have a good setup for that. So if you have it pouring out of a pipe, which I know a couple of you do, you can fill your bottles directly from that water. If you don't have that set up, you can use a clean container, which has been rinsed 3 times in sample water. So in your kits, you also have empty sterile bottles, which can be used to fill the other bottles. This would be a bottle without a colored dot, and generally they will note on the label a 0 or a circle with a slash through it to indicate that nothing is in that bottle. So you can use that bottle to fill your other bottles, and then you'll need to fill that original bottle as well. You'll need to fill your bottles to the neck, which is where they start to curve in for the lid. So make sure that all your bottles are filled to the neck. The bottles with stickers do contain that acid that we were talking about. So make sure not to overfill that, because you don't want any of that acid leaving the bottle either. It needs to stay in the bottle in order to preserve your sample. Label your bottles once you've completed filling them. So make sure you have your discharge point ID. So 001, 002 for most of you. And it also should have the date and time on there. Those bottles need to go into a cooler with ice, and they do need to be chilled until the point that they reach the lab. So if you're going to be, just one small note, if you're not going to be taking them immediately in a cooler with ice, they can go in the fridge until they need to be transported. And then when they are transported, they should be in a cooler with ice. Okay. If you have any small vials, this is only facilities that are conducting fueling on site. Those small vials need to be filled very carefully to the brim. So this is something that's a little bit delicate. You want to make sure you're taking your time with this. They should have virtually no air in there. So they have an inverted lid. So when you put it on, it will take away that little indent in the top. So once you fill the bottle to the top very carefully, you'll put the lid on and turn it upside down to see if there's any bubbles. If there is a bubble, add more water and check again. Be very careful not to overfill those again, because they do contain the preservative. Okay. And then sample delivery. The lab that we use is called Enviromatrix. They did recently move within the last couple of weeks. So their new address is very close to their old address, so it's the same general area, but their new address is 9590 Chesapeake Drive, Suite 5. Has anybody visited the new lab yet? I don't think so. Okay. And then you do need to make sure that your samples are dropped off within 48 hours. If you have any bus washing going on site, the shortest holding time is for soaps. So MBAS is soaps. And so that does require drop off within 48 hours. If you're not doing washing on site, check your SWIP and check the holding times in that section of your SWIP. So metals are 6 months, but I think the other shortest one is total suspended solids probably. I think that is 6 days, something like that. So if you're not going to take them immediately, then check your SWIP to make sure you're getting them to the lab in less than that holding time. Note that the lab is not open on the weekends. Generally, they can be open on Saturdays if you arrange it ahead of time. But generally, I think for you guys, if you're sampling on a Friday, you do need to try to get that sample into the lab before they close on that Friday, unless you have staff that are willing to work on a Saturday. And then again, they have to remain on ice. Okay. General notes, sample days, rainy days are very busy at the lab. So do try to wait until the next business day. Obviously, if you need to get that in within 48 hours again, and that's a Friday, try to get that in on the same day. But if you can wait, try to wait. It'll just be a more smooth, less stressful process for all involved. When you're getting to the lab, make sure all your bottles have been labeled. That includes the tiny vials. And then make sure your chain of custody is ready. I did send out, again, a link to updated chains of custody. the lab has reported that they are still getting old chains of custody. And this does affect their processing. It just makes it a little bit more complicated for them. The new chains of custody have all of your site-specific testing already selected. It has your facility name. It has all the contact information for Ashley and myself to get the reports. So make sure you're using your most up-to-date chain of custody. I will actually need to update that with the new lab's, the lab's new address. But for now, I'm sure they'll be accepting the ones that are available. So in the rain alert that I sent earlier this week, there was a link to a folder which has your most up-to-date chain of custody. If you're unable to download that for any reason, just let me know. I can send it to you directly. But when I do those updates, I'm going to be putting the most recent copy into that folder. So just make sure that you're checking that. And then before you leave the lab, make sure to pick up your replacement kit so that you're ready for your next sampling event. Okay, here is that beautiful chain of custody. Once they send me their new template, which will have their new address at the top, we'll be replacing this. But the things you do need to include is your name, your district's name, the discharge point number. So each discharge point will have its own line. So 001 if you have 002 or 003 for some of you, each of those goes on their own line. Include the sample date and time, the number of containers and types. So number glass, number plastic. This is important because this is your legal record. So any point when this sample changes hands from whoever took the sample to whoever's driving the sample to the lab, or whoever is, if that's the same person and then you get to the lab, then this will be your information there. But this part needs to be filled out anytime the sample changes hands. So if you're going to send a driver down to the lab, make sure you complete this relinquished by you and accepted by your driver portion before they leave. And then when they get to the lab, they'll complete a new line, which transfers that from the driver to the lab. All right, and then any questions on sampling before we move on? And just as a general reminder, this presentation will be made available later. So if you need to refer to it during a sample event, it will be available to you as well. Okay, and then to our last permit requirement section. So reporting, you have to use SMARTS. This is the website for that. And the most important thing is to make sure you have a legally responsible person or two. You can have more than one. You can also have duly authorized representatives. So I want to make sure that you always have at least one person that's available that has the power to certify any report. So this both means that they need to either be in the system as a legally responsible person or duly authorized, and they also need to have a current electronic signature form. So you do need to see a yes in this column if you're looking at the SMARTS site for your district. For all linked users. So anybody that says no in the column for e-authorization is not actually authorized to certify yet. So if that's the case, let me know and I can help you. The things that have to happen in SMARTS is you do need to certify every qualified storm event sample analysis. I let you know once we receive those results. I'll send you your analysis letter and instructions to certify in SMARTS. This does need to be done within 30 days of receipt of those results from the lab. So often when I send that notification email, I'll let you know what the deadline is for getting that certified, but generally try to get those ASAP. You also need to certify the annual report in SMARTS, which is due July 15th of every year. I know that's a good time for going on vacations over the summer. So if you're going to be going sooner, we can start to certify your annual reports as early as the middle of June. So if you do want to certify early, just let me know. I'll get your annual report in there sooner. And the ERA reports, if you've entered level 1 or level 2, you'll know that those ERA reports are due by the end of the year every year. They're actually due on January 1st, but I just say the end of the year. All right, so with that, Lana is going to take it away with something a little fun to break up the session a bit.
Yeah. All right. So we've prepared a stormwater trivia, just to kind of test your guys' familiarity with this. A fun test, though, just for everyone's benefit. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen in just a second. All right. All right. So we're going to divide everyone into teams according to your district. So you guys know who your team members are, and the goal will be for you to figure out the answer to the questions. Also, I realize now that it would have been helpful if you could have been in a room with your district. As it is, go ahead and use the messaging tool. If you want to kind of like talk among yourself, you're able to message only specific people and kind of figure out the answers. So the way that it's going to be played is I'm going to read out the questions, and then after the questions have been read, you're going to have 1 more minute to answer. And then following that, I will read out the answers to the questions, and you're going to want to keep track of the scores. And I will kind of ask like, okay, did certain schools get 2 points, 3 points? There's going to be 3 sets of questions. The first questions are going to be about QSEs, or qualified storm events. The second questions are going to be about sampling. And then the last questions are just going to be about random permit requirements. All right, does anybody have any questions? Yes, no?
Lana, I just wanted to go over really quick in case anyone's having trouble viewing the PowerPoint. If anyone's not seeing it, towards the top of the screen, you should see 3 dots. And if you click on that, there should be an option to click on focus, and that should be able to give you the big screen of the PowerPoint if you're having an issue seeing it. So I just wanted to throw that out for anybody who wasn't seeing it.
Alrighty. Okay, so with that, we will begin. So the first question, these are going to be about QSEs. In order for a storm to be a qualified storm event, how many hours of dry weather, which otherwise no runoff, must come before the storm? All right, question 2. QSEs can occur outside of business hours. B, if there's a lot of rain but no discharge leaves the site. Or C, if there is runoff from only 1 discharge point.
And I will note, if you want to keep track on paper, wherever you are, and not in the chat, you can keep tally of your own scores, which we'll check at the end if we're correct.
Yes. All right, and then lastly, the last number of questions at 1 is, if a storm is a QSE, how many hours do you have to sample after the start of business hours? So business starts, how many hours do you have? All right, now we're going to have 1 minute starting now. We'll see if that is too long or too short of time. And Annika, I believe we're going to distribute the slides to everyone after. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. This is Ashley.
Ashley, okay. So you guys will all have the slides with these answers later.
Yes, I am recording the entire session, and we are going to put that up on the website for afterwards.
Excellent. All right, and with that, we are at 1 minute. So the answers are, and you're just going to keep track of the tally for yourself. For the first question, right. So in order for a storm to be a qualified storm event, you need to have 48 hours of no runoff before the storm. So if you have 2 storms back to back, 1 day apart, and both of them have runoff, it is not a qualified storm event and you don't need to sample. The second question, QSEs can occur outside of business hours. That's false. If it's outside of business hours, no sampling. B, if there's a lot of rain but no discharge. If there's no discharge, there's nothing to sample, so you don't have to worry about it. And then C, if there's runoff from only 1 discharge point, yes, you want to sample, even if maybe your other discharge points did not have runoff. So 1 discharge point has runoff, you're sampling, it's a QSE. And then the last question, if a storm is a QSE, how many hours do you have to sample after the start of business hours? And that's going to be 4 hours. I think you kind of want to have a strategy with that. If it's been raining a long time, if you expect it to rain a lot longer in the day, maybe you want to sample closer to 4 hours. But if you think that the storm's going to be over soon as business hours open, you just want to get that sample. Alrighty. Did anyone get all 3? I'm actually not sure how to see the responses. Annika, can you see the responses? I'm only on the PowerPoint.
I see Santee School District scored 100%. Way to go, Santee.
Yes.
And Valley Center and John Stevenson, looks like they are also getting perfect scores. So well done, guys.
Yes, good job.
All right, everybody give yourselves a pat on the back if you got this right.
Ready to sample for that one La Nina storm we're gonna get. So everyone's prepared. I like it.
Lana, there's
right.
a request to play the slideshow so that we're only seeing the preview.
Oh,
it's possible to look at the questions full size.
Oh, are you not?
It will be available as a PDF afterwards as well for a quick reference, so not just the recording. Yes.
Yeah. Annika, I'm sorry, are you saying that you can see all the slides right now?
Before we weren't seeing the full, like the display view, we were seeing the small preview.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Yeah, it should be, I'm in display view now. Let me know if that happens again.
Okay, we don't have content right now.
Oh, all right. Let's fix that. Sorry about that, guys. Okay.
Was there a particular question that you wanted Laura revisited? Okay. In the interest of time, we might need to move on, but yeah, I'll just let you know. Okay, she couldn't see question number 2, so no worries. We'll have this available as a PDF. This was just a little bit of a break, a little pop quiz for you guys. All right, I'm going to share again. Let's see. All right. And then can everybody see the presentation again?
Yes, it popped up.
Perfect. Okay. So I'm going to get into compliance levels. If you have been in level 1 or level 2, then you're very familiar here. Many of you have been able to stay at baseline as well, so you haven't gone into the higher compliance levels, which is great. Just so you know, the preferred status, of course, is to stay in baseline level. Level 1 and level 2 have additional requirements. So if you do have higher pollutant values, when you do have a qualifying storm event and that comes back from the lab high, we let you know with your analysis report. And if you do have that, then you will be leveling up in the following reporting year. So there's 2 different ways to level up. You can either have 2 exceedances of an instantaneous NAL. So NAL is numeric action level. And if the instantaneous ones, let's see, yeah, are the pH. So if you have a pH that's less than 6 or greater than 9 twice in a reporting year, or total suspended solids, aka dirt, higher than 400, oil and grease higher than 25, twice in any year, then an NIL is triggered. If you guys did not sample in the first half of the year and you have it high in the second half of the year, but you only have 1 storm event, you're not going to have an instantaneous NIL triggered. The other type of numeric action level, is an annual average. This is more frequently what we see. So those levels are a little bit lower for total suspended solids in oil and grease. And that's taking an average of all the different sample events of the year. So in that case, if you did only have one event, then you will have an exceedance because you have nothing else to average that down. Okay. So if you do have an instantaneous NAL, an average NAL, you'll want to sample additional QSEs to reduce that average down. If you do have an exceedance, for example, with zinc or copper, you only want to test future storm events for that particular pollutant. So this often means you're only going to be filling one bottle. You'd still need your standard full kit. So if you had the problem in the first half of the year, you'll still need to get your full kit the second half of the year. But if you're already in the second half of the year and you have a high value, you only need to test for that problem pollutant. I generally include some recommendations in the sample analysis letter, but it's often something that it's best to talk through as well. Okay. So here are some examples of the annual average NALs. These are the numbers that if your average is above, then you get that NAL trigger. If you do end up at the end of the year with an exceedance, you'll enter level 1 starting in July of the following year. And that means that there's a few different steps that need to happen. First, you'll have to have your evaluation by a QISP, so myself or Lana generally. You'll want to identify additional BMPs, so best management practices, and make those changes in your SWIP. So if you are updating BMPs to include some things that are more enhanced, or vacuum sweeping, or increased frequency, etc., all of those things need to be reflected in the SWIP. And all of those things need to be consolidated in your level 1 ERA report, which is something that I would prepare for you. And that needs to be submitted at the end of the year. If you are up in level 1 or level 2, it does take 4 consecutive qualified storm events without exceeding any NALs to return to baseline. Note that it's the average of the last 4 consecutive, but it does not post date. So you can't go into prior reporting years to get an average that'll bring you down. It has to be following the exceedance year. So that's something important to keep in mind. It has to be moving forward. If you do continue to have exceedances for the same pollutant in that year, then in the following year, you're going to enter level 2. If you enter level 2, the level 2 report is more involved, therefore more expensive. So it is additional costs, and then plus there's the cost to implement the additional PMPs that may be required. It doesn't matter if you're in level 1 or level 2, 4 consecutive QSEs will still return you down to baseline. So that's good to remember. In wetter years, when we have a lot more storms, it's a little bit beneficial in this way. If you can continue to keep sampling, then that'll bring you down to baseline faster. As many of you are aware, there are different pathways to compliance. So if you do have exposure at your site, that's why you have to sample. And so generally the ways to comply is then to control the sources of those pollutants, or treat the water before it leaves your site. The first is less expensive. This is housekeeping, this is proper maintenance, etc. Treating runoff is much more expensive. These are bioswales. These are filtration devices that actually remove the pollutants from the water, and they are of course expensive. There is another pathway which some of you have elected to pursue, which is no exposure. If you're able to eliminate exposure of anything industrial at your facility, then you do not need to follow all of the protocols for the industrial permit. You just file a no exposure certification, and that just requires annual recertification. I'll get into that a little bit more. So source control, as I mentioned, this is all of your minimum BMPs. Those are required, but enhanced BMPs may also be required at your site if your minimum BMPs are not sufficient to reduce those pollutant levels. And so this includes all of the things that you're doing at the site to remove those pollutants from being exposed to rainwater. Treatment is the structural BMPs. So these are the things that cost a lot of money. Cleaning it up, removing the pollutants, slowing it down to allow pollutants to settle out. And so, yeah, another compliance strategy is to eliminate that runoff as much as possible. So redirecting into infiltration areas. This is something that has been effective in some cases. Okay, if you're treating the runoff, that means you're getting cleaner samples. But it does not replace BMPs. So this should always be considered as a last resort. You should still be doing all of your minimum BMPs upstream to keep the pollutants from entering that water, because the more pollutants that are entering those systems, the faster they're going to degrade and become less effective over time. Treatment devices also require maintenance, so that's another cost there. And if you're actually going to do an official treatment, so if you're going to install a bioswale or a vegetated swale, something along those lines, they are actually required by the permit to meet design standards. So that does require some engineering assistance. The link there will take you to what those design standards look like. So there's different types of these. I won't get it too into detail, but yeah, they can be very, very involved, like these subterranean vaults up above here. They can be less involved, such as filter inserts and fabric, media inserts, etc. There's also some witches' hats and some booms at the bottom there. Some examples, some things that can occur at sites that is pretty low cost. Just helps to slow runoff down, and anytime you're doing that, you're going to allow time for those pollutants to settle. So if you have a berm, these are some good examples here, dictating how those should be arranged. So they should always be angled up towards the path of flow, so that you don't get the just redirection of the water around your berm. You want the water to hit the berm, slow down, and then slowly either flow through if it's a gravel berm, or go over if it's a sandbag or a different type of boom. Okay. So these are pretty effective. Just as a general note, use gravel bags where you want the water to flow through, and use sandbags if you want it to flow over or around. Obviously, the sand does not allow the water to flow through as easily as the gravel, which has those open voids between the rocks. And as another general note, fiber rolls can float and can get moved around. So do secure those using gravel bags, or if they are on pervious ground, you can stake those down, and that should be about every 4 feet. If you are able to eliminate runoff, then you don't have to take samples. So this has been effective in some places where they're able to redirect into landscaped areas. And in those ways, at least during smaller storm events, which is pretty typical in San Diego, you won't have any runoff because it's all able to infiltrate. Because if the water doesn't leave your property, you don't need to sample it. So that's just a good thing to keep in mind. And a few districts have been dropping off of our group to their benefit because they're able to get no exposure. And that means all industrial activities and materials are contained or within cover and containment or areas draining to sewer. So this has been achieved most often by erecting roofs over any of their maintenance areas or storage areas. So to get no exposure, everything that's related to vehicle maintenance, fueling, or washing has to be done in a completely contained and covered areas. Okay. And again, that just requires an annual recertification if you achieve that. So it's very beneficial. Obviously, building structures can be expensive. Just keep in mind the cost of maintaining your permit compliance includes, the permit fee every year, and obviously includes our group fee and any costs related to any extra events that you might have. So it may be cheaper, you know, if you guys aren't having issues. But once you start getting into level 1 and 2, where things get to a little bit more expensive, that's especially encouraging to try to get the exposure, because it's a little bit more certain as well, compliance-wise. Okay, for you today. Does anybody have any questions on anything we've gone over so far? Okay, I don't see any questions popping up in the chat. Okay, well, feel free to contact myself or Lana or Ashley as well at any point. Obviously, if you have questions, you know, I'm always available. The phone number here, that's a mobile line, so if I can answer, I will. If not, leave me a message, shoot me an email. I can generally respond pretty quickly, especially on rainy days. I'm generally on high alert, so if you have any issues with your chain of custody, with getting the sample, all of that, you know, we have staff out there doing sampling as well, so we can always help you out as needed. Just so you know, one thing, we haven't had anybody using this service so far, but DMAX is contracted to provide the sampling as well. So if you do need that, if somebody's going to be on vacation, you know, just let us know ahead of time. We do need some advance notice. If your staff is going to be gone and you need us to come out and take those samples, we can do that for you. I do have a question for where do you get more sample tape? I'm assuming you mean the pH paper. That if you let Ashley Cadwell know over at the county office, and she can send some via truck mail. So Ashley, it looks like Damien will need some paper.
Yes, what district are you in, Damien?
Oceanside.
Okay, yeah, I'll send some over to you, Damien, at Oceanside, no problem.
All right. Anybody else have any questions? Anything you want to note? This is your opportunity. Okay, well, I'm sorry I don't get to see you guys in person, but I'll be seeing all of you, you know, before the end of the year. We do have until the end of June to get everything completed for the year. I anticipate, hopefully, we'll start our site visits March-ish, March, April, May. There should be plenty of time to get out to see all of you, you know, before June, but we'll try not to leave it too late, too late in the year. Well, thank you everybody for attending, and just let us know, shoot me a message if you guys have any questions pop up. You're welcome, Nick. Okay, and if you're staying on for municipal, that will be starting, I believe, at 10:30.
Yes, at 10:30, that's correct. And just a reminder for those of you who are attending, if your name isn't in your person, make sure you shoot it in the chat so we can make sure that we count you for attendance. If you have more than one person sitting at your computer from your district and you want to make sure everyone gets credit, just send the names through the chat so we can make sure everyone gets credit, okay? Thanks, guys.
Okay, we'll take a break and we'll be back at 10:30.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
For people who are just joining us, we're just taking a little break before we start the next session at 10:30, so just hang tight. Thanks. All right, everybody, it's 10:30, so I'm just going to say hello to anybody new who has joined us, and hi again to those of you who were in the first industrial meeting. My name is Ashley Cadwell. I'm the Stormwater Lead at SCCOE, the County Office of Education, and today we have a couple presenters from DMAX Engineering that are going to go over some information with us. And for attendance purposes, if your name is not showing up on your icon, your full first and last name, please just shoot that over to us in the chat so we can make sure you get credit for being here. And same thing, if you have more than one person on the laptop with you, somebody else from your district, just shoot us everybody's names in the chat so we can make sure everyone's getting credit. Throughout the presentation, if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to use the raise hand feature or send your question over in the chat or unmute yourself once you do the raise hand feature. We can do that too, just whatever's easiest for everybody. And give us just 1 second to get everything up and going. And thank you everybody for sending the names over. That's so helpful. So for those of you who just joined right now, what I was saying a minute ago was if you don't have your full name showing up, just shoot us over your full name in the chat so we can make sure that you get credit for attending today. And Annika, whenever you guys are ready, just let me know who's going to be speaking. I'll go ahead and do an introduction.
I think Lena will be talking first. Again.
All right, so let's see. So everybody, welcome to the municipal portion of the annual stormwater training. We're going to have Lana give us some information first. Lana Graves holds a bachelor's and a master's of science degrees in the earth sciences, and is an assistant project scientist at DMAX Engineering with a background in stormwater compliance program planning, inspections, and reporting. Lana is also a QISP and has been working with SDCOE Compliance Group for the last several years, and we're very happy to have her here today. Go ahead, Lana.
Thanks, Ashley. Hi, everyone. Super glad to be with you this morning. It was nice to meet a lot of you this last year during walkarounds. So excited to give this refresher on stormwater and then some other things. So as you can see from the agenda, we're going to go over Stormwater 101, pretty much just the basics. We have a fair amount of updates to present to you on progress with the municipal permit, application of the construction general permit to schools, and some County of San Diego investigations that are going on and that might impact you. And then lastly, we're going to go over behavioral BMPs, which is just want to make sure that you're implementing those right now, even though you're not covered by the permit, pretty much preparing to be covered and practicing those BMPs in preparation. And then lastly, structural BMPs when it comes to designing them, what's kind of going into that, and then also routine care of those, just a refresher on those things. So diving right in, Stormwater 101. For those of you guys who are in the industrial, this will be a little familiar, but for the municipal group, I want to make sure to go over this. So what is stormwater? Rain. It's coming out of the sky and then it's hitting all of our built surfaces and non-built surfaces, right? But we are concerned with the water from the point it makes contact with the earth until it reaches our water bodies, creeks, rivers, bays, lakes, oceans, estuaries. And what is the big deal? So the main thing here is that stormwater is not treated by the sewer system or really by any system right now, except for the ones that we put in place, right? So if we have structural BMPs, that's treating it in a sense, but otherwise all of that runoff that's hitting our roofs and our driveways, it's picking up pollutants and it's just going straight out to our water bodies, which through the outfalls and different things like that. And then the other is that it contributes excess runoff contributes to channel erosion, which can be an issue for infrastructure and ultimately ends up being a municipal issue as well as a pollutant issue because it's transporting sediments and the heavy metals those sediments carry out to water bodies. And we have a quick clip on this that I think is kind of a cute way to think about what's the big deal with respect to rubber duckies.
Again, just want to make sure, is everybody seeing the presentation? I just stopped sharing that. And we'll be sharing a video. Okay, so everybody should be seeing a video right now.
Whoever the person was who wasn't seeing the presentation a minute ago, are you seeing it now? Okay, great. If anybody's having trouble again seeing the presentation, just throw a message in the chat and we'll get that going for you. And just a reminder, I forgot to mention earlier for the new people joining just for this meeting, we are recording the presentation. So just letting you know, if you have your camera on, you are being recorded because we're going to put this up for people to view later. So just a heads up, this is being recorded. All right. Thank you, ladies. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if the sound was on for everyone, but pretty much the idea behind that little clip was if it was rubber duckies that were washing off, it wouldn't be so bad. We would just kind of like brush them out of the way, but it's pollutants and they end up everywhere and they're bad for us, they're bad for ecosystems. So we want to minimize those. And when we say pollutants, that's just kind of like a big catch-all term. But what we're really talking about is just byproducts from our everyday activities. In schools and cities in our daily life. So this image, I think, did a really good job of capturing where all of these kind of like random groupings of pollutants are coming from, right? Oil and gas from our autos, trash generated from pretty much every activity that we do. Nutrients, your sewer systems, or different areas where people are using the restroom. Gasoline, hazardous waste, that can be an issue if it's leaking. Pesticides and fertilizers, often we like our really green grasses, but it takes a lot of nutrients to keep them that green. Moving towards desertscapes is definitely more ideal in this case. And then sediments, we kind of touched on that already. So this is dirt. If and when the schools become covered by the municipal permit, they're going to have to be sampling, and you don't want to have a lot of dirt in your sample. So that's something to make sure you have an eye on right now. And then kind of going clockwise here, back to trash again. Trash amendments are a big thing the state of California is focusing on. So wanting to keep in mind that that goes downstream, and we want to minimize that. And what's the big deal about all those pollutants, right? So it's kind of like, well, these are byproducts. Why do we care so much? Dirt ends up clogging our storm drains, becomes a municipal issue. And then the other thing is once it reaches downstream, in San Diego, we don't have so many water bodies because we're a much drier climate, right? But that means it's even more important in our creeks and our like smaller, really more delicate water bodies, that they're not getting smothered by a lot of sediment that's coming through the storm drain system. Metals, these are carried in the sediments. They also are coming from all different sorts of machinery, just the daily use of them, wearing down parts, and those end up being toxic to different aquatic life. It messes up their neurological processes, and that ends up kind of skewing ecosystems, and then all of a sudden we're out of balance, and it's one more natural process that's not functioning how it used to anymore. Leaves and grass, this seems like a pretty harmless one. You mow the grass, the residue grass is left there. Why is this an issue? When it gets into your storm drain, it ends up decomposing after it goes through the system, and while it goes through the system, takes up oxygen. Again, it's a disruption to downstream ecosystems, and it can also become an issue in the storm drain system if it's creating clogs and backups. Oils and soaps, these, same thing as metals, mess up life downstream. And then bacteria, this is definitely impacting both people and animals, right? How many water bodies do we have that we can swim in? And then how many water bodies do we have that we want to swim in? I think even the ocean is off limits after a rain, right? Because we know what's been washed downstream, we all see it, and we don't want to go in it. So minimizing that impact as much as possible is definitely ideal. And then lastly, trash, says right there, all of the above. It's toxic, it impedes enjoyment of our natural environments, and it messes up the natural processes. So, and in order to kind of control those pollutants, the state of California has a bunch of different permits and different guidelines to follow. A big one that we've been talking about for quite a while with regards to school districts is the municipal permit. And this is something that cities are under, and they have to make sure that they're controlling their pollutant discharges, but schools are not yet under. So right now, I believe we expect that schools will be covered in 2021. We're going to talk about that in a second for the updates. But when they are, they'll be subject to Tmdls, which are total maximum daily loads, pretty much saying like, okay, if you collect, or this area can't have this level of pollutant or more, and then different permit requirements. And then also, because schools aren't covered right now, it's encouraged that you cooperate with organizations and municipal departments that are subject, and they're trying to meet these limits, and they're trying to stay in compliance. So it's nice if schools might be upstream from somewhere that, like, say, the County of San Diego is inspecting, that they cooperate with showing like, hey, we're not contributing that bacteria, or we're not contributing that dirt to your sample. And then lastly, another permit that's meant to control these pollutants is the construction general permit, which school sites are subject to when they have large construction projects. So we're going to kind of talk about some changes to those permits and how they impact schools. And I believe that's going to be John is talking about these.
Okay. Good morning, everybody.
Hi, John. I'll go ahead and do an introduction for you. Thank you so much for joining us. You guys, we have John Quinsner here, and he holds a bachelor's and master's degree of science in the environmental sciences and has been working in stormwater management for over 17 years. John is a certified professional in stormwater quality and a qualified SWIP practitioner developer. He is active in regional watershed management groups and has worked with over 20 Southern California municipalities to develop and implement municipal permit-related compliance programs, and John has been providing guidance to SCCOE compliance groups since 2013, and we're so happy to have him here today. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Ashley. Glad to be here as well. Can you hear me okay, Ashley? Okay, just want to make sure. Sometimes the microphone doesn't cooperate very well. But so anyway, as far as some updates here, the main update that we have been talking about the last few years, or I guess probably longer than that, is the small MS4 permit, the phase 2 municipal permit, which is a state permit. That's the one where schools eventually will be designated and required to enroll under that permit. The original plan was that that permit would be coming out probably as soon as last year in 2020, and that it would result in schools being designated due to a lot of things, mainly the COVID pandemic. That permit is it's getting pushed back a little bit, and also the State Water Board staff have been pretty sympathetic in the conversations we've had so far in terms of allowing schools to push back the designation under the new permit. There's been some conversations that we've been involved with, along with CASH and CASCA, the California Stormwater Quality Association, with the state board people who are writing the permit, and they've tentatively, expressed willingness that maybe the way the permit could be written is that, let's say the permit goes into effect sometime later this year, schools would have another 2 or 3 years after the permit goes into effect before you technically have to start doing anything. So we'll see how that goes. The permit is not written yet, and they might change their mind. So that's why, we on behalf of all of you guys are continuing to stay engaged in this process. But hopefully it will be something like that, and it will recognize that schools are in a tough spot right now, and now is not the best time to be adding a lot of new requirements to you. You can go to the next slide, Annika. Okay. Then another update would be there's a different municipal permit that applies to the phase 1 agencies, and phase 1 agencies just means the County of San Diego, County of Orange if you're over there, County of Riverside if you're over there, and the incorporated cities within those counties. So these are the municipalities that are your neighbors, and their requirements are going to be changing probably later this year. There's supposed to be a draft of that permit that comes out in the summer, and they're looking to adopt it by the end of the year. It shouldn't address schools directly because you're not a phase 1 agency that would be covered under that permit, but it is expected to make the requirements stricter on the county and the cities. And a lot of times that rolls downhill and starts affecting you because the local municipalities are under some pressure to reduce various kinds of pollution, and they start trying to find other people that they think they can get on the hook to help them fix those problems. So one example of that is trash amendments. There's a statewide trash policy that requires controlling trash that's about the size of a cigarette butt or larger. And it generally involves installing a lot of screens or similar devices in storm drains to control trash. And some of the municipalities that have started planning for that already have said, hey, we think middle schools and high schools are often a source of trash, and we maybe need to push them to do something more. So once this permit goes into effect, probably within the next year or so, you may start getting more requests from your neighboring city or county folks asking your district to do something about trash from students at schools. So just something to be aware of. I know you already are doing a lot to control trash and take that seriously, but just be aware you might get some questions. On Tmdls, this is more of an indirect effect again, but the main Tmdl that relates to almost all of the county, a lot of San Diego County, is for bacteria. And in April of this year, 2021, there are some requirements that are due to be achieved that are probably not going to be achieved in a lot of the watersheds where they apply. So the local municipalities are working with our local regional board to get an extension on that. And then they're going to have to do some extra effort, probably some more monitoring and source investigations, which you would not have to do anything on. But again, if they're looking for things more closely, it may be that they start thinking schools are part of the source, and they may come asking questions about, hey, what are you guys doing on your property? Are you contributing here? So again, just something to be aware of. In Choyas Creek, which not too many districts are in, it's a kind of Lemon Grove, and I think La Mesa Spring Valley may have some properties there. But there's good news there. There was an update to the allowable levels for copper and zinc that made it less strict, which doesn't usually happen, but did in this case. And so that means that right now in that part of the county, their standards are being met, which means if you're in that area, at least from that respect, hopefully there would be a little bit less pressure on any district properties there from the local municipalities. So that's a good thing. And then just to talk about the County of San Diego in particular, there's a couple things for those of you who have any of your schools or other properties in the unincorporated area. The county has been doing a lot of bacteria monitoring related to the bacteria Tmdl, looking for human sources of bacteria in particular. And they're doing some genetic type of testing to differentiate between human sources of bacteria, which is essentially sewage, and other sources of bacteria like birds or raccoons or dogs or things like that. And the logic there is that if it comes from humans, probably it's more likely to make the water polluted and make you sick. So it's a higher priority. And they're doing a lot of source investigations. Some of those involve cities like El Cajon and Santee as well. And I know that even just already, we've had some communication with some districts, like Annika, I know, has reached out, where they've said, hey, we think maybe some of your properties might have an impact here. So I don't think any school has been identified as a source, which is good. But again, just be aware there may be some questions coming your way. Another thing is that the county has received a notice of intent to sue from a couple of environmental nonprofit groups. And the general gist there is that there's the idea that any of the local municipalities may get something similar down the road. So they're all a little bit more under scrutiny on that and are kind of applying that to anyone else in their area and looking to limit their liability. So nothing specific that you need to do right now, but just so that you understand kind of where they're coming from and what they're thinking about if they do come and start talking to you about some of these things. Then I think this is the last update that we have. I think many of you know that there's a construction general permit from the state, and that applies to any construction activities generally that are at least an acre in size. So if your district has some building projects that are going on or some improvement projects or things like that, there's a good chance that you would be subject to the construction general permit. And that involves things like preparing a stormwater pollution prevention plan and putting in various erosion and sediment control Bmps to stop dirt from going off your site. The state just came out with a preliminary draft of an update to that permit, and some of it's not super different than the current permit, which is mostly good. They do have some changes that, of course, would make it more work for you all. One is that inspections have to be done more frequently. The main change there is that every time it rains, regardless of how big the storm is, there has to be an inspection before the storm, during the storm, and then after the storm. In the current permit, you only need to do that if it's a storm that's at least half an inch, which we don't get that many half-inch storms in San Diego, so that would be some more work. And then it also is requiring more work to be done by certified people, by QSDs or QSPs, rather than people they may designate. For those of you who may have some older buildings that are getting demolished as part of projects, there's some requirements in there for any buildings that were built between 1950 and 1980, that all the demolished material, all of the waste from the demolition has to be either immediately taken off-site, or for the time that it is on site, it has to be covered so that rain does not contact it. And if you can't keep it covered, you have to do a bunch of additional sampling, which would be expensive. The reason that they're concerned about that is they suspect that there might be asbestos or lead paint or other kinds of contaminants that used to be used in buildings that aren't used anymore. And if you're demolishing an old building, then you may be exposing some of those kind of contaminants. So that's where that requirement comes from. And then they're also looking at ways to change grading a little bit so that you don't lose topsoil on the site to the extent that you can. I think that one's probably fairly manageable, but may require a little bit of creativity with your designers. And then a couple more changes. They are like those of you who were in the industrial training, they're also incorporating Tmdls into the construction permit. In our area, there are only 2 Tmdls that they're incorporating, or two regions that have Tmdls. So one of them is Choice Creek, which is a fairly small part of the county. That one is something we're going to watch and maybe comment on, because you would be required to do monitoring for metals, and although the limits are not extremely low, if you exceeded the limits, they're an effluent limit, which means that you would get fined immediately upon exceeding the limit. So that's not the same as an action level where you have a chance to fix it. In this case, you would just immediately get fined. And then the Los Penasquitos Watershed, which is more or less the area along the 56 corridor, you would have to estimate the amount of flow that you got off your site for one storm during the year, which would be a little bit of work, but there's no like regulatory standard on the amount of flow that you would need to meet, so that shouldn't be too bad. There's water quality monitoring that you need to do if you're in Choice Creek. But for projects that are anywhere else in the county, you would not need to do anything with TMDL. So I think that would be most of the projects that you all have probably would not be affected by this. But if you are in the Penasquitos area or the Choice Creek area, you would have a little more work to do. The other sort of statewide change that they're making is the trash amendments. They're pulling that into this permit as well. And you either have to prove that there's never any trash that leaves your site at all, which is probably pretty challenging for most construction sites, or you would have to install these trash screens that they call full capture systems at all your discharge points, which would create some additional expense. So we'll see if that one stays in the permit and exactly how that gets fleshed out when they proceed with this adoption process. But that one potentially could increase the costs. So the timeline for this is this past November. That's when they released their preliminary draft, which is the one we've been able to see so far. They're going to have a more official draft that will incorporate some of the feedback they've gotten on the preliminary draft sometime this spring. They're going to have a public workshop and a hearing with the state board staff in Sacramento sometime spring, summer, probably more summer. When they say spring slash summer, they usually mean summer. And then later in the summer or possibly into the fall is when they're looking at adopting the new permit. So it wouldn't go into effect immediately, but probably relatively soon after that, people would need to start meeting the new permit requirements. So if you have any construction projects that are supposed to start sometime within around the next year or into 2022, keep an eye on this one, because the requirements may be changing at least a little bit for those projects. And that's all I got. Does anyone have any questions before we go back to Annika for this one? Sounds like no.
All right, so we have a little bit of a game for you. Yeah, so Lana, do you want to explain the rules?
Yeah, definitely. So this is going to be a version of catchphrase. It's kind of similar to taboo. So we're going to divide everyone into 2 teams. It's going to be according to your district name. So if your district name starts anywhere from A to L, then you're going to be on team 1. And if your district name starts anywhere from M to Z, we have no Z districts, but if you're in that window, then you're going to be on team 2. And what's going to happen is there's going to be pretty much like a word master from each team, and we'll send that person a list of 6 words, and they will have 1 minute to describe the words in such a way that the people on their team can guess what the word is. And you can't use any part of the word that you're trying to get them to guess. That's the only restriction. And if you do use a part of the word or the word itself, then you can't get credit for that word, and you have to move on to the next one. So I'm going to ask for volunteers. If there's 3 volunteers, that would be great. Hopefully we'll be able to do a total of 6 rounds, so 3 rounds for each team. And then Annika will message you the set of words that you're going to have to guess, but not until it's your round. So I guess, does anyone have, or is anyone up to volunteering? Mm-hmm. You can type it in the message. Are they going to, also Annika, will they be able to unmute themselves, or do we need to unmute them?
I think they can unmute themselves. Yeah. So yeah, if you want to just really quick raise your hand or type a message in the chat saying you volunteer. Yeah, this is just for fun, so it's not big pressure, but
and which I guess is kind of putting people on the spot. So if you don't volunteer, we also have the idea of just kind of randomly selecting a district, and then someone from your district can be the word master. So maybe in like 10 more seconds.
Okay.
All right, so what about Escondido Union High School District? Does anyone from there want to go?
I think we have some people from Oceanside on. Excellent. Is anybody from Oceanside on that wants to go for this? Okay, if not, Lana and I can, I guess.
It's true.
Also.
Do you want to be team 1? I'll be team 2.
Sure. Okay. So I'll be team 1. So everybody on my team is from A to L. Yes.
Yes.
So if you enter in the chat what the word is, then I will call that out as having been guessed. Yes. Okay. So we're going to go. Lana, you want to put a minute on the clock?
I will start the minute. Ready, go.
This is the yucky stuff in the water that makes you sick, for which you receive antibiotics to kill.
Excellent.
Bing. Okay. This is that thing made of straw that you put across to try to prevent erosion.
All right.
Do we have it?
They got it. Yeah.
Okay. This is the thing that your storm drain goes into. It's a concrete box.
And you're at 20 seconds, by the way.
A little tough. Yeah. I think we're gonna skip that one.
Right. They got basin, so I think.
Okay, good.
5 seconds.
Oh, God, I lost it. That's hard.
All right. So team 1, 3 points.
Awesome. So we got bacteria. The second one was fiber roll. I also would have accepted straw wattle. And then the third one was catch basin, which we got basin. So great.
It's true. All right. So for team 2, if your school name starts between M to Z, I'm going to be reading the words for you. Annika, will you keep an eye on the chat?
Yep.
And then I'm going to start the countdown now. All right. All right, now. Okay, so it's the thing where water flows through it. It's kind of shaped like a U. A lot of the times they're like by the side of a road. It's part of the MS4. It's uncovered. They're a lot of times made of cement. Sometimes they're dirt.
Close enough. I think we've got some synonyms.
Okay, this is a way that you can clean cement or buildings, and it's fluid with a lot of force comes out of it, and you need to make sure to contain the fluid and not let it go to the MS4.
Yep, they got it.
All right, excellent. And
Power wash, pressure wash.
this one is, a lot of times there's like a rectangle opening on the side of a sidewalk where stormwater goes, makes its way towards it. Sometimes there's like a grate over it, and it's, you would put a filter, yes, inlet, excellent.
Yes, inlet.
Okay, and the last, or not the last one, okay, this is usually like a big pipe that stormwater exits into a water body from. And oh, the timer's done. Okay.
Okay.
Sorry.
That was, yeah. Okay. So you guys got 3 as well. So we're tied up.
Excellent.
Okay, we'll do.
I wonder if there's a way to put the timer up. Probably show the screen. Okay. All right. Well, let's do round 3. So
round 3, team 1. Come on, we got to get more points. Look alive.
All right. I'm going to start the timer now.
Okay. If water goes this way, it's going to be treated. So it's a different type of connection, not the storm drain, but the where all of your toilet water goes and sink water goes. Your clarifiers are connected to it. Sewer, yes. I'm gonna pick my, this would be a large quantity of dirt or rocks or anything that you're storing for your grounds department would be called a how about the governing body in San Diego that can come on your site?
Oh, and the minute is up. Alas.
Okay. We only got one. So the one I was struggling with was stockpile. Those are things that do need to be covered for those materials. And then the last one was the regional board, which we did get just after time. So thank you.
Alas. Alrighty, team 2. Let's go. See if we can get more than 1 point. All right, so I'm going to start the timer. And this is something that happens to unpaved areas when it rains, or when you have a lot of cars going over it, or when it's not stabilized with vegetation. You want to avoid this from happening because it will contribute.
Yep, they got it.
Yes, excellent. All right. This is something that you put into an inlet and it catches all the kind of yucky stuff getting into it. That's bigger. Obviously, it's not catching like really small stuff. Yes.
Filter, yes.
Screen. Okay. These are things that you can do in order to avoid pollutants from making their way to the storm drain system. So this is kind of, yes, BMPs. Excellent. this.
I think you're probably at a minute, but I think you've already won.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I am doing so bad. Okay. Well, okay,
All right.
It's definitely a minute. And I'm putting you in charge of watching the minutes when I do it now.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry, Team 1. I'm not trying to give Team 2 a hand up in this way.
Well, I think that Team 2 has a commanding lead here. So,
Well, how many was that? We got 3. So
3.
we're at 6, and Team 1 is at 4. You guys got this.
Okay, we'll do 2 more quick rounds. All right, so.
All right, timer, go.
Okay, these are the general term for all of the things that you don't want to go down into the storm drain.
What do you think? Oh, now
All the bad stuff.
I gotta do my meeting, bro. I think it's over. There's only 6 people in it.
Yeah, we've got pollutants. Right. Okay. And then the next one is the thing that requires special disposal.
No, it's still 45.
Like automotive fluids and like that. Also paint and other chemicals. It's a general term. You have to label them appropriately, and they have to go through waste hauler.
Yeah,
yes, as waste. The concrete that has holes in it that allows water to go through. This is something we haven't covered yet today, but we've talked about it before. It's a special kind of, porous paper.
Porous. Okay.
And then if you pipe something into the storm drain.
And
that's a minute.
I think you're at time, Annika.
All right, we got 3. Good job, guys.
All right, the last round. Annika, will you make sure I don't go over a minute on this one? Maybe we're gonna do 50 seconds. I will keep a better eye on the clock. Sorry, Team 1. All right.
I got it. Yeah. Ready? Go.
You gonna start it? Okay. So this is a type of water body. It's kind of long. It's generally wide. You can do different sorts of like sailing in it. A lot of times the stormwater system will connect to it. It's within a watershed. It's like a more minor part that you might go rafting in if the water's clean, or you might go kayaking in. Yeah, river. Okay. The next word is, this is the type of fluid that we're here to talk about and make sure is preserved and not polluted. It's rain that comes to the earth. It's a very specific type. Yes, stormwater. Okay, and then after that is, it's kind of the same thing, but it's
time.
Okay. There it goes.
Right.
All right. I think that Team 2 won by 1 point. This could be disputed due to the time effects, but I would say great job, everyone. It was fun to see the answers. Yeah.
Thank you for participating. Okay, we do have another portion of the presentation to get through, so I'm going to go through now that you guys are all awake again and having a good time. So go through the behavioral BMPs. Okay, so one big thing that has come up in the past is making sure that the BMPs implemented on your sites are implemented by everybody that's on your sites. So you do have contractors, we know, coming on to do some maintenance. So we want to make sure that you are including stormwater language in those contracts and making sure that your goals are being communicated to those contractors. A lot of people assume, since that's what they do for a living, that they're doing everything appropriately. That's not always going to be true. So make sure that they are aware that your district has a stormwater management plan, that you are serious about your goals of not, polluting and following all minimum BMPs. And adhering to standards. Make sure that is written into your contract as well, that's their responsibility to do. And then monitor them, so try to go on site when they are doing their work to make sure that they are doing what they said that they would. And if they're not, make sure you're communicating with them what those deficiencies are, pointing them back to their contract and making sure that they implement those for you. Your own staff, of course, are a little bit more under your control, so make sure that you're conducting training with them, communicating goals again, and making sure they understand, that they have to do these things, that they're not optional. but also try to facilitate. So we hear a lot that, we train the janitors, or we train these people to do it this particular way all the time, but it's just easier for them to go wash in this corner. So try to facilitate and provide everything that they need in order to do it appropriately. So if they do gravitate towards a certain area and that's more convenient for them, is there a way that you can provide those materials in that area to allow them to continue what they're doing, just doing it properly? So creating a boundary, a containment system, something like that. And then reinforce, so post reminders. We send out the monthly messages with those types of topics so that you can post them and try to keep it fresh in their minds, and make sure that you're reinforcing those methods as well, and reminding them when things happen. Something that we do see is uncontained power washing. So obviously people like to keep things clean, and that's fine, but you are not allowed to let that water get into the storm drain system. So ensure that you are collecting and disposing of that water properly. You will need some materials in order to do that the right way. So what's pictured here is a vacuum boom that has been set up to contain the water, and then it's actually sucking up that water so that it can be disposed of to the sewer system. This is one thing that comes up for lunch areas as well. So if you are power washing places, I know it's occasionally needed, but make sure you're identifying any storm drains in the area and protecting them. So you can put a cover over them, surround that with gravel bags or sand bags to make sure nothing gets in, and then clean up the water before you remove those protections. Okay. Stockpiling, this can be very, this happens a lot, which is why when I come to your sites, I'm often walking behind containers and buildings, because things do tend to accumulate in those areas that are not easily seen. In particular, your material storage areas at your maintenance yards tend to have a lot of stockpiled materials. Just make sure if you don't need something that you are routinely getting rid of them. Provide convenient disposal and storage options. So providing those metal recycling bins or the dumpsters, or if you do, think that you may need these items in the future, try to provide a place that's safe for them to be stored, such as underneath a permanent roof overhang or awning. Okay. Dumpsters do need to be covered. So if you are getting a larger roll-off type of dumpster, try to have a plan for how it will be covered before it arrives. These dumpster disposal companies do have lidded dumpsters that can be provided. Otherwise, if you have a canopy or a roofed area where the dumpsters can be located, that's a good option as well. I know they can be more expensive to get the type with lids on them. So if it has overhead cover, then you don't have to worry about that. Make sure that you are checking this occasionally when you're doing your regular site checks, and making sure the lids are intact. And this applies to smaller dumpsters as well, making sure if they are missing a lid or they've developed cracks or leaks on the bottom, that you're getting those dumpsters replaced. Okay. Some special programs. So we've seen, with auto shops and, pools and art programs, anytime you've got something with a large amount of materials, potentially in chemicals, paints, automotive fluids, etc., it's really good to involve the instructors of those programs. These are great programs, we want to continue to support them, but the students, one thing that helps to get this across to the instructors is to that the kids that are learning these skills are going to need to know how to do them properly in the real world as well. So if they do go on to be mechanics, they should have proper procedures in place as well, and know how to handle hazardous wastes, etc. Again, providing convenient solutions in the same way, making sure they have interior spaces that they can store things. They aren't relegated to, a back lot for storing everything. Okay, we've had some issues with irrigation systems in the past as well. Leaks and overspray are typical things that we see that are problems. Note that irrigation runoff is not an allowable discharge. It's not clean rainwater, so it's not allowed. So you do want to make sure to be routinely checking those. I know kids can kick the sprayers off and cause a whole host of problems. So make sure that they're checking them periodically. And also, this is something that tends to happen after hours. So if you do come in the morning, pay attention to where those wet stains are. If you see it, going across the sidewalk and down the street, then you want to make sure that you're checking those irrigation systems as well. Any question on the behavioral section of BMPs? Okay. So we'll get into structural BMPs. So several of you do have, especially at newer sites, you do have some of these structures installed. So I just wanted to go through occasionally because there can be a bit of a disconnect between the installation and then down the line, the ongoing maintenance of these devices. So first you want to identify the goals of what you're trying to achieve in that area, and make sure that generally your engineer is picking the right type of solution for that. So sediment sources are not going to clog up a pervious infiltration area pretty quickly. So if that's your issue, it may be better to choose a different type of device. So that's kind of where we're going with that idea. And then preparing for future maintenance. So when these things are put together in the plans, they should include indications for the type of maintenance to be conducted and the frequency that should occur. So make sure that gets translated into your maintenance department so that they understand how often they should be checking. If it's a filtration media insert, that's a question we get often, is how often do those need to be replaced? And then how to know when it's ready for maintenance. So there can be some types of devices where you'll need to check them periodically to make sure that they're working appropriately. And it's a really good rule of thumb to go and observe them during a rain event to see that they are functioning appropriately. So they're not causing a flooding issue, the water's not ponding, on top for, more than several days or whatever's indicated in the plans. Does anybody have any personal experience with any of these types of devices that you think would be useful to share with the group? Okay. All right, so we'll go back. So then some of the routine care, so pre-rain maintenance, making sure that the inlet itself is not clogged. Pervious surfaces, the way to maintain those is to vacuum sweep as well. There's some post-rain maintenance to make sure you're checking those, your filter inlets to make sure that the water has flowed through, that they're not causing water to pond up in those areas. Ponding water can be a vector control issue, so mosquito breeding grounds, as well as just indicate that your device isn't going to function appropriately in the future. So that's something to always check on as well. So filters often, especially this smaller types, will need cleaning and replacement frequently. So they're not ideal. They're good for keeping trash and larger debris from getting into the storm drain system, but they're not as ideal for sediment and other problem areas. Okay, so I went through that a little bit quickly, just to make sure we're within time here. Does anybody have any questions at this point? Okay. Well, we do have all of our contact information here. As John was mentioning, there's a lot of updates coming up with, construction permit stuff and new permit. There may be times when your local municipality is reaching out. So just as a broad, reminder, we're always here to support you in any of those, efforts. So if you do need any advice, or if you would like us to be present for, a site visit from the county or the regional board or anything like that, please do let us know. We're here to help you and advise you as needed.
Thank you, Annika. I also wanted to just say thank you to everybody for joining us virtually this year. I know things are looking a little bit different, so thank you with all of your patience. And if you guys have any comments or suggestions on how this format worked out, feel free to shoot me an email so maybe we can try and do things better in the next training or anything like that. I welcome any comments that you might have. So my email address is up there on the screen. I'm Ashley Cadwell at SDCOE. And does anybody have any questions? Feel free to just unmute yourself or send it through the chat box. We'll hang out for a little bit.
Yeah, and of course, we are hoping that our next training event will be in person, hopefully next fall, and we'll return to a normal sort of operations. Yeah, that's our hope. Thank you, Tracy. Thanks for attending.
And it is our intention, we did record this meeting, so we're going to be putting the presentation as well as the recording of this up on the website. You guys will get access to it. So if you want to go back and watch later or share it with your coworkers, you'll have the ability to do that.
Okay. Thanks, Ashley, and thanks, Fabi, if Fabi's still on, for running our meeting today.
You're welcome.
You're welcome, everybody, saying thank you.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate you attending.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and close out the recording, and thank you all for attending. Take care, everybody.
All right, thanks, guys. Have a great day.
Bye.